The bride was fixing her dress. Downstairs, violins had already started playing. An old man in a faded military jacket stepped up to the entrance. "I'm the bride's father," he said, steady voice. The young staffer glanced at his clothes, then at the guest list. "I'm sorry, sir. Your name isn't here. This is a private event." The man didn't argue. He just stood there, still quiet, like a shadow in a room lit for someone else. No one noticed that he was the one who raised the bride alone for 20 years, the man who carried her to school through the rain, who just drove across 3 states, slept in his truck last night, and came here with nothing but a handwritten invitation. And now, he was left standing outside. His name was Daniel Beck, retired Staff Sergeant, United States Army. 2 tours in Iraq. 1 Purple Heart. Countless scars no medal could ever honor. But if you asked him who he was, he wouldn't mention any of that. He'd just say, "I'm Emma's dad." He had been a soldier once, yes, but he became a father forever the day his wife passed away. Emma was 10, too young to understand death, old enough to feel the hole it left behind. From that moment, Daniel didn't serve a nation anymore. He served a little girl who clung to his hand at night, whispering, "Don't leave like Mom did." So he stayed, and he built a world around her. They lived modestly, no vacations, no luxuries, just enough. He worked construction during the day and drove delivery trucks on weekends. His hands were always rough, his back always sore. But he never missed a parent-teacher meeting, never forgot a birthday, never let her go to school without breakfast, or without hearing, "You've got this, baby girl." One spring, Emma wanted a dress for her middle school graduation. They couldn't afford one. So Daniel stayed up 3 nights sewing it by hand, crooked seams, mismatched thread, but it fit her like armor. She wore it like royalty. He didn't talk much about his time in uniform, not because he was ashamed, but because he didn't want her to learn glory from war. He wanted her to learn it from kindness, from honesty, from holding the door for strangers and standing up when no one else would. "Be someone you'd be proud to meet in the mirror," he'd say. Or more often, "You don't have to impress anyone. Just be decent." And she was. Emma grew into everything Daniel prayed she would be. Bright, brave, unshakably good. She studied medicine, earned scholarships, volunteered in clinics, sent him postcards from every milestone. He kept them all in a shoebox under his bed. Then came the engagement. Her fiancé was a young tech entrepreneur, wealthy, well-spoken, with a family who hosted charity galas and drank wine with words Daniel had never heard. But he didn't mind. Emma was happy, and that was enough. The wedding was to be held at the Langford Grand, a hotel that looked more like a castle than a venue. Everything was arranged by the groom's side designer, floral walls, gold-trimmed invitations, private chefs flown in from New York. Daniel didn't ask questions. He didn't want to get in the way. He just circled the date, packed his jacket with the cleanest dress shirt he owned, and waited for the moment his daughter would walk down the aisle. He wasn't coming to be seen. He wasn't coming for the buffet, the music, or the applause. He was coming for one moment, to take her hand, to walk her forward, not as a war hero, not as a guest, but as a father, the one who never left. The invitation came in the mail, but it wasn't printed on gold-trimmed cardstock like the others. It was handwritten blue ink on a folded piece of notebook paper. "Dad," it read, "I want you to walk me down the aisle. No one else. Just you." Daniel read it twice, then again. He folded it carefully and placed it inside the breast pocket of his military jacket right over his heart. He didn't take it out again. He didn't need to. He'd memorized every word. He tried calling Emma that week. Just once. Straight to voicemail. He figured she was busy, bridal chaos, big family plans, 100 details to manage. So he left no message. He didn't want to bother her. He'd tried calling her twice that week, once during lunch break, once just before sunrise. Both times the calls went to voicemail. Emma had been caught in non-stop dress fittings in a boutique where cell signal barely reached the walls. Daniel figured she'd call back. She always did. This time, she didn't. He simply packed a small duffel bag, filled the truck with gas, and hit the road. 3 states, 800 miles. He drove through the night, stopping only for coffee and gas. At a rest stop somewhere in Kentucky, he stretched out in the back seat and closed his eyes. He didn't book a hotel. He didn't think he'd need one. By sunrise, he'd arrived. The Langford Grand stood like a palace wrapped in morning light. In the parking garage, Daniel used a small towel and bottled water to clean his boots. They were scuffed, but serviceable. He brushed off his old military jacket, carefully smoothing the creases, adjusting each medal, re-pinning the one that always tilted left. Then he checked himself in the rearview mirror. Not to admire, just to be sure he looked presentable. This was her day. But it was his moment, too. He'd imagined it for years, not the flowers or the music, but the walk. That first step, side by side. Her hand on his arm. Her whisper, "I'm ready, Dad." He didn't bring a gift. Didn't need one. His presence was the gift. And that seat at the end of the aisle, the one she said would have his name on it, was all he came for. The hotel lobby gleamed marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and floral arrangements so perfectly trimmed they didn't look real. Strings of music drifted through the air, and staff in pressed uniforms glided past with clipboards and earpieces. Daniel stepped through the front entrance, head-high shoulders squared. His military jacket, though clean, showed its years. The fabric had softened the edges, worn. The metal's service bars, a Purple Heart, a combat badge, clinked quietly with every step. At the edge of the ballroom entrance, a young woman in a black blazer noticed him. She smiled quickly, then hesitated. "Good morning, sir," she said, polite but guarded. "Are you here for the Langford wedding?" Daniel nodded. "Yes, Emma Beck. She's my daughter." The woman's smile faltered. She checked the guest list on her tablet, her fingers tapping nervously. I'm sorry, sir. I don't see your name. Do you have an invitation?" Daniel reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the folded note. "The handwritten one?" She glanced at it, unsure. "Do you happen to have the formal printed invitation?" He shook his head. "She sent me this. Said I'd be walking her down the aisle." The woman looked around, clearly unsure what to do. A man with a headset walked over, likely a supervisor. She whispered something to him. The man glanced at Daniel, then at his boots, then at the medals. He lowered his voice. "Sir, I understand. But the groom's family has a very strict guest policy. Only those on the official list can be admitted into the ballroom area. I'm sorry. It's out of our hands." Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't protest. He just nodded once. "All right." He stepped back. 1 step. 2. He stood near the marble wall, out of the way, hands folded in front of him. Still quiet. Waiting. People walked by in suits that cost more than his truck, in gowns that shimmered under the chandelier light. A few cast glances his way, long enough to judge, short enough to avoid guilt. "Who let that guy in here?" one woman whispered to another, trying to be discreet, but failing. "Is he security?" someone else muttered. "No, I think he's just—" No idea. But it's weird, right? Daniel heard it all. He didn't flinch. Inside, the ceremony was beginning. Guests were handed champagne, ushered to their seats, beneath arches of imported flowers. The bride was being helped into a dress that took 3 people to carry. Outside the ballroom, Daniel remained still. He reached into his pocket again, not for the invitation this time, but for something older. A small, worn photo of his late wife. Edges curled, a little faded. Emma was only 5 in the picture, sitting on her mother's lap. That was the last family photo they ever took. He gripped it gently. A security guard walked by, paused briefly, his gaze lingering on the medals pinned to Daniel's chest, then said nothing and moved on. Daniel wasn't here to cause trouble. He had no demands. Only one wish: to see his daughter take that step. The one he'd dreamed of from the moment he held her as a baby. The step he promised her mother he'd be there for. And yet, now all he could do was wait. On the outside of the moment he'd once been invited into. Inside the bridal suite, Emma stood in front of a full-length mirror veil, in place bouquet in hand, surrounded by bridesmaids, adjusting every last detail of lace and silk. The wedding planner whispered updates through her earpiece, while stylists darted around with hairspray and lip gloss. Everything was perfectly choreographed, except for the silence in Emma's chest. She smiled for the cameras, nodded at suggestions, laughed at comments, but something inside her felt off, incomplete. She stepped toward the window. A soft breeze moved the sheer curtains. Below, in the courtyard, she saw a figure still alone, leaning against the stone wall just beyond the ballroom. Old military jacket, worn boots, broad shoulders that had carried her through childhood. Her breath caught. It was him, her father, outside, not inside, alone. The world around her blurred. Someone asked, "Are you okay?" But she didn't answer. Without a word, Emma turned. Her heels clacked against the marble as she walked, then ran through the bridal suite, down the hallway, past the stunned planner calling her name. Her train dragged behind her veil, slipping off bouquet, tumbling to the ground. Guests in the lobby turned in confusion as the bride— Yes! The bride rushed past them, eyes locked on something no one else could see. She reached the courtyard door, flung it open, and stepped out. Daniel turned at the sound. His face didn't change. Just a flicker of surprise in his eyes, then that quiet, steady calm that had carried her through every storm. "Dad." Her voice cracked. He tried to straighten his jacket. It was instinct, like he was back on the parade line. "Hey, baby girl." She walked up, arms trembling, and threw them around him. Tight. Desperate. Like she was trying to hold the years together. He held her back. For a moment, neither said a word. Then she pulled back, tears already running. "How long have you been standing here?" Daniel looked away just briefly. "A while. Didn't want to bother anyone. They said I wasn't on the list." Emma's jaw tightened. Her hands curled into fists over his chest. "They told you. You didn't belong." Daniel smiled gently. "They were just doing their job. This place, it's not really made for someone like me." She shook her head. No, that's not true. I get it, sweetheart. I don't fit here. And that's okay. I just wanted to see you walk in, even if it's from the back." She stepped away, wiped her face, took a deep breath, then reached down, lifted the edge of her gown, and without hesitation, took his hand. "We're not doing this without you." He stared at her. "This is your day. And it starts with you." She didn't wait for permission. She turned. Still holding his hand, she walked back toward the building, past stunned guests, past planners, waiters, and whispers that grew louder by the second. Is that her father? What's happening? Where's she going? No one stopped her. The doors to the ballroom were still open. The music had paused. The officiant looked up, confused. The groom stood at the altar, brows furrowed. Mark gripped the edge of the podium, not with anger, but with something slower, deeper realization. He had met the man in stories, but somehow He'd let him be forgotten in the details. Now, watching Emma walk back in hand with her father, he understood. This was the story. And then they saw her. Emma, in full wedding gown, holding the hand of the man no one had invited inside. They walked together slowly, deliberately down the center of the ballroom. A silence fell. Emma held her chin high. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were still wet. "This is my father," she said. "He raised me. He taught me what honor means. And if he doesn't belong here, then neither do I." The silence deepened. Then somewhere near the back, a single guest stood. A man, maybe mid-50s, with a military lapel pin. He looked at Daniel and said clear enough for everyone to hear, "I served with him. Mosul, 2004. He saved lives, including mine." Daniel didn't react, but the room shifted. The whispers stopped. The tension broke. And suddenly a murmur of applause began, small, hesitant, then spread like wildfire. Not polite, not out of obligation, but real, raw, respectful. Emma turned to her father. "Shall we?" He looked down at her, that quiet smile barely forming. And then they walked. Together. Down the aisle. Not as a soldier and a stranger, but as a father and his daughter, finally right where they belonged. The music had stopped. The officiant stood frozen, holding his binder mid-sentence. Guests shifted in their seats, unsure whether to stand or sit, speak or stay silent. Emma stood at the front now, just below the altar. Her dress still trailed behind her, dusted with the grit of the hotel's courtyard. Her hand never left Daniel's arm. She turned slowly toward the crowd, toward the perfectly arranged tables, the gold chairs, the sea of carefully styled hair and polished shoes. Then she stepped up to the microphone. Her voice, though soft, filled the room with something sharper than volume truth. "I wasn't supposed to speak today," she began. "But I need to." A ripple of discomfort passed through the rows. The groom's mother whispered something to his father. A few heads turned toward the event coordinator, who just looked down at her clipboard. Emma's gaze never wavered. "This is my father," she said, turning toward Daniel. "He raised me. Alone. After my mother died, he worked 2 jobs, missed sleep, missed meals, missed everything except being there for me. Every single time." She paused, her throat tightening. "He didn't wear a suit today because he doesn't own one. He wore his uniform because it's the finest thing he has. And he stood outside because someone decided he didn't look like he belonged." Gasps. A rustle of fabric like silk regrets. A sudden shame tightening across chests. Emma leaned in closer to the mic. "If my father isn't welcome in this room, then I'm not either." Silence. Complete. You could hear the sound of someone setting down a wine glass 2 tables away. And then from the 3rd row on the right, a man stood up. He wasn't dressed like the others. His suit was plain, almost outdated. A small pin gleamed on his lapel, a service ribbon. He cleared his throat. "I served with Sergeant Beck," he said loud enough to reach the back row. "I was a medic in his unit. Mosul, 2004. All eyes turned to him. "We were ambushed," he continued. "Pinned. Thought we weren't making it out. But he did. And he carried 2 of us bleeding unconscious through enemy fire. Got us out alive. He's not just a guest here. He's the reason I get to sit in this room with my family today." A hush fell again. Not empty this time, but heavy. Real. Daniel looked down at the floor, then at the man. Recognition flickered in his eyes, followed by a nod. No need for words. Emma reached over and squeezed her father's hand. And then, just faintly, someone began to clap. 1 pair of hands, then another. It wasn't the polite applause of a ballroom used to toasts and speeches. It was slow, staggered, unsure at first, but growing. Row by row, people rose to their feet, not because they were told, but because they'd remembered something. A man who had stood alone outside, forgotten. A man who never asked to be noticed. A man who was simply present. Daniel didn't bow, didn't wave. He didn't even smile. He just stood there next to his daughter like he had his whole life quiet, steady, unwavering. And for the first time all day, the attention that had once dismissed him now bowed to him. Emma looked out over the standing crowd, tears still shining in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, not into the microphone but to her father. And then she turned to the officiant. "Now," she said, "we're ready." When the ceremony resumed, it wasn't quite the same. The chandeliers still sparkled. The violins still played. But something had shifted. The stage wasn't lit by spotlights anymore. It was lit by the weight of what had just happened. Daniel walked slowly with Emma to the front, then gently let go of her hand. He took a seat in the front row, right side father of the bride. No one stopped him this time. No one dared. He sat with his back straight, boots planted firmly on the polished floor. In his hands, he held the folded invitation Emma had sent him, the handwritten note, the one that said, "Just you, Dad." He didn't open it, just kept it there, pressed between his fingers like a medal more precious than any he'd ever earned. Guests still watched him, but not the same way. Not with suspicion, not with judgment. Now it was something closer to reverence. The ceremony went on, vows, rings, promises, whispered through tears. But it was quieter, more grounded. The extravagance was still there. Yes, the flowers, the gowns, the silver-plated everything, but now it all seemed to circle around something deeper. Gratitude. Emma glanced at her father again and again throughout the vows, as if anchoring herself in his presence. As if to say, "I'm still your girl, even here." After the kiss, after the applause, as guests began to move toward the reception hall, one man stayed behind. He was older, dressed in a black suit, with a subtle military pin on his lapel. He approached Daniel with the kind of caution and respect only soldiers recognize in one another. From his pocket, he pulled a small metal coin, round, dark-etched, with a unit insignia. A challenge coin. For civilians it might look like just a trinket, but in the military it means something sacred. A challenge coin isn't handed out casually, it's earned often in blood and fire. It means, "You stood with us. We'll never forget." He placed it in Daniel's hand and closed his fingers over it. "You were the standard," the man said quietly. "Some of us never forgot." Daniel didn't say anything at first, just stared at the coin for a moment, feeling the weight of it, not in grams, but in memory. Then, slowly, he looked up and smiled, his first smile of the day. Not wide, not proud, just real. And in that moment, no one needed to say another word. He didn't need a stage, didn't need a mic, didn't need the room to turn toward him. He had shown up. He had stood still. He had waited. And eventually the world turned back around to see what it had nearly missed. There are some heroes who never step onto the stage. Not because they're forgotten, but because they were too busy building the stage in the first place. They're the ones who stayed behind the scenes. The ones who carried the weight so others could rise. The ones who didn't ask for applause because they were busy clapping for us. People like Daniel don't need a microphone. They don't need lights or invitations or titles. They just need to be seen. And sometimes we forget to look. We get caught up in the polished, the planned, the perfect. And we don't notice the man standing quietly near the wall, the one who gave up everything so that someone else could have something beautiful. Daniel didn't demand anything. He just showed up, on time, with his shoes cleaned and his heart full. And when the world tried to keep him out, The truth, his truth, walked right back in and brought him home. Heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear worn-out boots. So today, ask yourself, is there someone in your life who's always stood just outside the frame? Someone who never asked for thanks, but more than earned it. Don't wait until they're standing outside, a moment that was meant for them. Pick up the phone, send the message, say the words, call your parents. Today, before they're left waiting in the quiet where heroes wait to be seen.